Hey guys, this is Scott Horne, and this is going to be another episode of Scott versus ChatGPT in regards to our creative finance industry. So if you find this helpful, take a minute and like the video. If you got any comments, don't forget to comment below because we'll be happy to do our best to respond. And don't forget to check out and join our YouTube channel. So this next question of Scott versus ChatGPT is, the question I typed in is, so what are the specific requirements in Texas for a subject to transaction? Let's see what it comes up with. And I'm just going to read along real fast as it types up its stuff. Okay, so it popped this up, and what I'm seeing in it is it's just talking in generality again. It comes up with due on sale, disclosure and consent, which would just be our basic disclosures, I think. Talking about insurance and taxes being paid in some format. Legal and title considerations, but it doesn't give you any specifics whatsoever. Talks a little bit about risk management. And so what it's leaving out, of course, is all the compliance issues that come into play in a Texas subject to transaction. Here in Texas, of course, we have what is called the underlying lien disclosure notice, which is a mandatory document to be given from a seller to any buyer when an existing mortgage is left in place. And there is also a new insurance disclosure that must be included. And both of those must be included in Spanish and English. It leaves out things like these must be closed in a law office or a title company, or the transaction is void. And the other part that just doesn't come up is one of our statutes here says that if you contract to buy a home or actually buy the house using a subject to transaction, which is a form of a wraparound mortgage, technically you're supposed to be a licensed RMLO and registered with the state of Texas. So in this instance, ChatGPT just went through basic, and I'm going to say very basic scenarios, as opposed to getting into the meat of what the actual question was. So let's move on to our next question. Okay, so our next query that I've typed in is similar to my last one, is what are the specific requirements in Texas for a wraparound transaction? So let's see if it gets us any more detail or kind of does the same thing that it did regarding a subject to type transaction. So it's going through and typing up some things for consideration. And the first one that's coming up right now is existing mortgage considerations. Again, due on sale, proper documentation and recording, and licensing requirements. Now that was left out in a subject to requirement. Here it's talking that the seller must comply with state and federal lending laws, which is true. But in Texas, there is a 3 property de minimis rule as opposed to in other states where you have none. It talks about some disclosures that are out there, but it doesn't tell you what they are. It talks about escrow arrangements, which is a mandatory issue under Dodd-Frank, but it doesn't specifically hit Dodd-Frank in this instance. Again, it goes back to the same insurance and tax obligations and risk management. So again, when I see this, it's hitting off in a very general term as opposed to talking about processing the borrow utilizing a residential mortgage loan originator. What it is as a seller lender that you need to be thinking about when you're doing a wraparound mortgage for your borrower in that instance. What are the Texas requirements? Not just the SAFE Act and Dodd-Frank Act, which are federal, but what does Texas law state specifically? And of course, for a wraparound mortgage, if you do more than 3 transactions in a 12-month period, you must be a licensed RMLO, registered with the state of Texas. These must be closed in a law office or a title company. Again, the underlying lien disclosure notices and insurance disclosure notices must be disclosed. And of course, when it talks about disclosure requirements, it's very general in nature, which are things such as disclosing the existence of the first lien, making certain that the borrower understands how to navigate that appropriately, and all the various disclosures that you need to include, such as due on sale again and things of this nature. So in the first two queries, what I saw was just a very general overview as opposed to getting specific, which is what I really think that we in the creative finance industry need to be considering, because you've got to dig down deeper than just the surface, which is what ChatGPT seems to be spitting out with these queries. Now, I understand you might be able to get more specific on the queries. I'm not certain how to do that per se, but again, I'm just seeing specific, very general things and not the specifics that I think we really need to be seeking out and understanding. So let's go to our next query. All right, so my next query that I've typed in is, how do you overcome objections from a seller on a subject to transaction, which of course is something all we investors have to talk about and discuss with sellers as we are approaching a property to purchase. So let's see what ChatGPT has to say about this. Of course, it says sellers aren't familiar with this. They need to get educated. Good luck with that, right? Highlight the benefits. And it says, for instance, if the seller is in a hurry to move or facing it's moving too fast for me, hang on, financial difficulties, this might be an option. Okay, I kind of like that to that instance. It talks about professionalism and credibility. Try to establish your credibility and professionalism, which I have to admit, I like that. I think that's something very important to talk to a potential seller about. Addressing financial concerns. It just says sellers might be worried about their ongoing liability for the loan. Obviously, that's a big one that they have out there, and reassure them by discussing the safeguards that can be put in place, such as using a third-party servicing company. Okay, I get a third-party servicing company, but that doesn't really protect them. What protects them in that regard is a security instrument, is a deed of trust that allows them to regain ownership through a traditional mechanism, which would be foreclosure, should that help ever happen. It talks about legal and ethical reassurances. Well, consulting with an attorney, those kind of things is always beneficial. The problem is they rarely do. That's one of the things you'll see, that when you work with my offices and disclosures along the way, we put them in layman's terms for the seller to look at, because so rarely will they ever talk with an attorney, and usually they are in financial constraints and they don't have the money to talk to an attorney. It talks about how to talk about risk mitigation and things of that nature, and the flexibility in terms out there. Well, if you're buying a property subject to, the terms are what the terms are. You can't change the terms of the underlying debt out there. Now, it doesn't go into things such as cash payments. It doesn't talk about maybe second liens being placed on the property for equity. It talks about quick closure. Okay, that goes back to, I think, the very first comment it had about benefits. So it's kind of reiterating itself in that instance. Now, it does talk about building a relationship, which is important when talking to a seller about these kind of transactions, because we do need to come across as credible and professional and things of that nature. I think that's a given. But it just doesn't get, again, into the meat of the transaction of letting them know who you are as an investor. How many deals have you done? How are they going to have an assurance that you're going to be able to make their payments going forward? Because that's really the last thing that they want to do, is get out of one problem and jump right into another one along the way. And it does touch base on the relationship issues that we talked about. but just doesn't go into how they're more protected and those kind of items. Because on a subject to transaction, you don't need to use a third-party loan servicer, because usually the investor can pay the mortgage company direct, because a seller has very easy mechanisms to determine payment history, i.e. going online or making a simple phone call to the mortgage company and navigating the prompts through the phone to determine their payment history, to know what you are or not doing. And so again, so far, at least with ChatGPT in this instance, I think Scott Horne's kicking its butt a little bit, because it's missing out on the small picture. It just hits the big picture only, which really isn't sufficient in our creative finance world. So let's go and try one more today with ChatGPT. Okay, guys, I'm going to dig a little bit deeper on the subject to transaction this time, and I'm asking, what are the issues I, as the investor, should be considering when buying a home subject to the existing debt? So let's see if it can dig a little bit deeper for us and what the response is versus what my response might be. Again, it talks due on sale clause, same thing it did in the prior three deals. Legal and financial liability. It does, talk about the original borrower stays on the mortgage. I get that. So that is a point for consideration. Talks about insurance and taxes again. Same thing it talked about. The existing liens and encumbrances. Okay, so you're taking over an existing mortgage. We already know that, but it doesn't go into more detail. It does talk about the condition of the property, which is an issue we all have to look at when we're trying to buy a home subject to the debt. Now, what is the rehab out there, which is what we're going to see when we inspect that home. Payment management. How do you provide transparency? I think they're trying to go back to the utilization of using a third-party servicer, which really isn't involved in a subject-to transaction, unless the seller just really wants to do that for some reason. It talks about negotiation of terms being defined, not specific. Have a clear exit strategy. Okay, I kind of like that, because if I'm buying a house subject to the existing debt, I like to know what my back-end strategy is before I buy the home. Am I going to lease it? Am I going to fix and flip it? Am I going to do a wraparound mortgage? Maybe a short-term Airbnb or mid-term type rental arrangement? I want to know that, but it just touches on the tip of the iceberg. It never seems to dig down deep into what are the things that we as an investor need to be thinking about. Because when I buy a home subject to the existing debt, I want to know all the terms and conditions of that existing mortgage, where it stands. I want to know what the escrow balance is. I've seen a lot of deals recently on the newer homes where the lender has failed to adjust escrow from a lot sale to a new construction sale, and the borrower gets hit with a very large escrow arrear. Things of that nature are out there that you want to look at. You want to know what your interest rate is and how that's going to play into your rental or a back-end sale of the property along the way. It doesn't talk about the amount of cash needed to get into a transaction, whether to bring a loan current, pay the seller, pay agents involved, things of that nature. And although it touches base a little bit on the property condition, that's a biggie really, because you need to know what that's going to stand. That's just, again, additional cash out of pocket that we run into. It talks about market conditions, but not marketability. And one of the things I'm really seeing out there with a lot of investors in 2024, when they're looking at newer homes they're taking over, is simply, is there new construction ongoing in the neighborhood, which really affects the marketability of your property. And you've got to know what that marketability is, especially in a slowing marketplace like we're in right now. How many months is it going to take me to get the property income producing, or if I'm going to do a wraparound mortgage to sell the home? What used to be 2 to 4 weeks today may be 60 to 90 days or longer. And of course, you've got to build these things into your numbers out there. So once again, as I've asked these questions to ChatGPT, what I'm seeing is very superficial type answers without it getting down into the nitty gritty. So you've got to almost isolate every single issue and ask it these items in order to get the basic answers that all of us investors need to know and understand when we're attempting to buy a house subject to the existing debt. Hey guys, I hope you found this a little bit entertaining and informational about what you can expect sometimes with ChatGPT. If you find it helpful and you liked it, take a minute and like the video, guys. Don't forget to make any comments below. We'd love to answer your questions for you as well. And don't forget to take a moment and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. We'll see you guys next time. Hey guys, don't forget to take a minute and comment below because we are going to have a drawing. And the winner of that drawing, I would say, gets the privilege. I'm kind of joking there a little bit, but the opportunity to have a 30-minute to hour-long call with me about either your real estate transaction, the real estate industry, the creative finance world, whatever it is you want to talk about. We're here to help you guys out and help you navigate your investment business.